my dear friends. Because there are a few young people, it was divine opportunity and one of the greatest opportunity for any council to stand before a 9-judge bench and do a matter. Of course, in a panel of lawyers. For the simple reason, in the history of Supreme Court, a 9-bench constitution has happened only 9 times so far. This is the 9th occasion, and we had, both me and Datta from our bar had the opportunity to speak there. And therefore, I first take the blessings of my senior, Mr. C. Natarajan, before I utter a few words, because but for him, I would not have reached that stage to be there in the first seat of the Supreme Court to argue for 3 hours on this issue. It was a wonderful experience and a wonderful gain professionally. But coming to this core issue of what has happened now, the judgment has done 2 things. A, it has reversed a 70-year-old law, which said, in the case of economic unity of India, no state is entitled to place any restriction on free trade within the borders of India. And should there be any restriction that is sought to be imposed, it should have a presidential approval. That's the mandate of Part 13 of the Constitution. So, this Part 13 is very unique when you read the rest of the constitutional provisions. This is one chapter where you don't conceive India as a federal setup first. In every other part, you find a center and a union and a state and a division of powers and trying to coalesce. All these are there, found replete in various provisions of the Constitution. Whereas in Part 13, the guiding dream of the constitutional makers was to have a unified economic India. There can be only one India as an economic India, not India which is a union of states of 30 or 29 plus union territories and split into such numbers of buckets in economic India. There is only one unified economic India. So there was no need for a discussion on a federal thought there, technically speaking. However, where do you find the connector? If we go through the constitutional provisions, whenever you have, the source of power is under Chapter 11, Article 243 and 246, it allocates the power between the union and the states. And we say that our constitution leans towards the center because the residuary power is with the union. Now, this is as far as source of power is concerned. But when there is a fusion between center and state, when they have to work together on many areas, the Constitution conceives either acting through the governor or through the president. It conceives different styles of a control. And when you say president, the constitutional bench has interpreted president to mean the central government because he acts on advice. So it's always the central government. Constitutional bench repeatedly says the expression president is actually central government. Now, if you see the various dispensations conceived in the Constitution, you have a sort of a presidential approval, presidential consent, presidential consideration, prior sanction, declaration. So these are all the types or modes of powers which the president through the central government can act over the states. The different contextual necessities. So there is a lock which connects the union and the state through the presidential control. This is there in the design. This is also found in Part 13. It says, what does Part 13 mean? It conceives a borderless India. It's no Tamil Nadu, no Karnataka, no Andhra. A trade within India has to happen as unified India. But because powers are there both with union and the center, the Constitution conceives, should state pass any legislation which acts as a restriction, then it requires presidential approval. If presidential approval is declined, the state cannot pass that legislation. That's the control. Now, for 70 years, a 5-judge and later a 7-judge have held restriction will include a restriction to taxation. Simple. You have a problem, suppose a check post, a very complicated procedure is sought to be followed. A huge astrological map is given to you by every lorry which passes through a check post has to waste 2 hours to fill up a form. It's a restriction. Imposing a higher rate of tax on the state is also a restriction. Now, the judgments so far, till the constitutional bench could deliver it, had said a restriction will also include a restriction on taxation power. We can't dissect it as non-fiscal and fiscal. Both are restrictions only. Whereas the 9-judge bench for the first time says, for an innocuous form to fill up at the check post, you need presidential approval, the judgment says. But imposing a 40% tax when goods come from Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka, you don't need a presidential approval. You don't need it. For the simple reason, they say taxation is a sovereign power for the states. States earn its money only through that source. So we don't want any center influence or control or a presidential sanction through that. We don't want to reach such a restriction. Now, what could be the impact of this judgment? So, a lock which is there in various provisions of the Constitution, one lock has been released today. State can pass taxing legislations which cannot be under central's influence or control. That's now very clear. President's power there has been now taken out through a judicial interpretation. Now, what could be the impact? As this is a roadmap. You see, every judgment leaves you further or progress in your judicial thinking process develops thereafter in that slide. Now, what could be the impact? The impact is this. Same 9 judges in Bombay, while deciding 2 critical components in the Constitution, secularism and federalism, have very clearly held we are a federal country without a doubt, but with a strong lineage to the center. Now, Bommai judgment declares the following principles. It says both this expression, federalism and secularism, is not defined in the Constitution. You will not find a definition for that. And therefore, they have said only courts can define these 2 expressions. Nobody else. It's not legislature, it is not executive, nor it is politicians or political parties. It is always can be done only through a judge-made law. Make it very clear. And they say the following in Bombay. A, thought of a federalism is seated in the Constitution, and our guidebook has to be only the Constitution and nothing else. If you want to know federalism, you should go only to the Constitution and not anywhere else. That's the first principle they say. And 2, they say the broad principles of federalism is each one is entitled to operate in their respective domains of power making, and one need not transgress into the other. That's the broad federal thought. 3, therefore they say it is we are co-equals. That's the broad description. But finally they utter a caution. Even though we say we are co-equals, the powers are not symmetrical, it is asymmetrical. That's the expression used in the bench, in the judgment. When you say asymmetrical, they define asymmetrical to mean all states ultimately have to depend on the center. India needs a strong center and not a stronger state to outbeat a weak center, to make the center weak. That message is very evident and clear in Bommai judgment. A case which was deciding from various states a proclamation of emergency under Article 356. That's the live issue, the most sensitive political issue, which the court, while deciding, says we have a strong lineage over the center. Now, why do they say so? The concerns are threefold. Why do we say our Constitution reflects a unitary thought? That's one question. Two, what are the concerns of the states today on this unitary thought? Three, by disempowering the center and empowering the states more, what are the consequences globally? This is not happening for the first time in India. See, federal setup is there in Canada, in USA, in Brazil, in several countries. European Union have unitary thought because they are small countries. Just Madras will be one country in some. So you have a unitary setup. Bigger size countries have a federal setup. So how these federal setups have undergone their own tolerance and turmoils and how they have matured themselves, there is enough evidence in the history. So these are the three issues which we should broadly understand and discuss. Why do we say India is a unitary setup in its own sense? The reasons are as follows. A, we have a single constitution. We don't have a constitution for each state. Two, let 150 parliaments assemble even after 1,000 years, if basic structure does not undergo a toss, none of the parliament can ever pass a legislation or a rule acceding or conceding the territory of India to anyone else. It's not possible. Article 1 and 4 utters that caution very clearly. There can never be concession on our territory. Our territory, we can expand it. We may even lose it in a war, but we can't concede it. Three, yeah. See, okay. I mean, exceptions do not go to prove the rule every time. I mean, we take an exception, then make it. That's my concern is only that in this judgment. If you carve out an exception and draw a map, where do we lead us into? That's the problem. Whereas when it comes to state, you can mutilate, you can modify, you can realign. All these possibilities are there under the present constitutional regime. Whereas you can't do that for the boundaries. It's a basic problem. It's the second issue which crops up. Three, national security, national integrity, drawing treaties with various countries, and running combined assemblies. These are all marked features in our constitution. For example, Article 253 permits the central government to enter into treaty with any country. A state government cannot go and enter into a treaty. It can invite people for investment, but it can't write a treaty. It can't sign a treaty. Treaty power is only with the center. And if you understand Article 253, doctrine of eclipse apply there, because central government can go and enter into a treaty with US and say, I am entitled to grant you VAT exemptions on all your UN official sale or sale which happens in India. We want to make it VAT free for the economic progress of both the countries. It can sign a treaty without asking the consent of the state, even though power to impose VAT taxes with the state. When you go and enter into a treaty, the state loses its power, even under list 2, entry 54. This is how the constitutional design is made. So treaty making power is only with the central government. So this is the third feature which gets highlighted. The fourth feature, we have a Supreme Court, which stands and which is the guardian of our constitution. The two basic tenets of Supreme Court existence is, one is a guardian of our constitution, and it's an umpire of interstate problems. And therefore, its judgment under Article 141 binds the citizen and also the states in equal force. So you have therefore a converging point as one single national mainstream. You have Article 311 All India Service. You have a CAG. You have ever so many things packed in the constitution which reflects that we need a unified India, and that needs to be a strong unified India. This is one issue. Now the second piece is the concern of the states. What is their concern? Their concern are the following. They say, we want financial autonomy, we can't be dependent on the center, because the policy and the decision-making process is extremely discretionary. And therefore, money is a source of strength and power, whether it's a family or a country or a state. And therefore, they say, this is something which we can't be dependent upon. This is their first concern. The second concern is their control and interference during normal period and during their excessive emergency proclamation power which they keep exercising. So the governor's post is always under a question of contest now in the recent past. 3. The alignment in a coalition era in the last 25 years has tossed up a lot of issue on the center-state frictional politics, starting from the dissolution to the latest statehood of Delhi, which is under challenge. So these are all the issues throbbing up in the last 25 years, more and more in the 70 years of democracy, which is throwing up some concern to states and its autonomy. Because Constitution also guarantees, it says you are unified in common order, but you are autonomous in your own space. And the problem is defining when you are unified and when you are autonomous. Because the overlap needs to be balanced every time. And only courts can do, and not through legislations. Now this is the areas of concern which was argued and pursued. But what are the downsides? See, today, up to Bommai, we have said a strong lineage to the center is a preferred choice. It's better. And there are reasons given for that, replete. Now the situation or circumstances has not changed or has become so worse that you need to upset it, and even if you have to upset it, you can't upset it with a bench of an equal strength of 9 judges. That's the first concern we had in our mind. But if you read the global history of federal process, federal polity, where states are more empowered, these are the consequences which states have seen in the history, life history of their nations. And surprisingly, the recent example is United States, a country which believes in a form of free enterprise. You don't claim any stature or status based on your nationality. You claim a status as you are given a land, you are given an opportunity, and you are given an opportunity to progress. And you should develop that country to the extent you can. This is how 300 years of civilization has happened there. Whereas somebody was able to whip for the first time a thought that America is for Americans, and win an election, and create a sort of a divide between races and between languages and between geographical territories. In a sophisticated and evolved, exampled democracy like US, this is now becoming possible. In fact, somebody made a statement, and a very, very correct statement. After the US elections, you can never claim or state there is something called a sane democracy or an insane democracy. You have sane moments in democracy and insane moments in democracy. It's cyclic. So nobody is spared, including USA. So their concern is, all the global thinkers fear the following. If you empower, in fact, in US, in India, residuary power is the center, whereas in US, residuary power is with the states. This is the biggest difference. Residuary power arms you better. That's how the constitutional debates encouraged residuary power to be retained by the center and not by the states. Now, these are the 2 points. One is the residuary power, another is the control to the president. So the fears they have is the following. A, if you encourage more and more of state empowerment, it produces parochial, local leadership contesting against the national interest. See, I'm just putting academically, not taking any sides. These are all what research papers across the world inform us as a matter of discussion and debate. Just want to throw it for consideration. It produces such type of leaders all over the world. One. The second casualty, therefore, they say is, your state influences, your state priorities and state policies start occupying center stage. That's the next consequence if you empower more and more with state autonomy. So second difficulty world order has found it. Now, third, they interestingly find, because we have a common IAS exam, we have a common, and we have judges from sub-court to reach up to Supreme Court, the possibility, it says, public institutions, people will start occupying public institution with state-centric feelings and attitudes. That will be the third consequences of empowerment. More and more people with regionalistic feeling will occupy national mainstream. Now fourth, therefore, what will be the consequence? Whether you will frame a policy for the nation or you will frame a policy for your state. That will be the real conflicting issues which can possibly arise. And they say you will normally tend, especially in the coalition governments, which is what they have found out in other parts of the world, which whoever is strong at that moment, his problems will occupy the center state and draw national attention, rather than conceiving a uniform nationalistic policy for a country. And fifth, they say, when you start dividing the autonomy between two power centers, the nation as a prize will fall between the two. You will never find where to figure the nation and position it. And six, in very, very extreme cases, not in our country, in extreme cases, this has resulted also in internal struggle, internal war, insurgency, and also a likelihood of a secessionist movements. So these are all the byproducts of empowerment, is what global study give it up. Now, where are we now placed? Last 2-3 minutes, I think it might have been 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes. So the last, now where do we therefore figure ourselves in this continuum? Will you prefer the first decade of when the constitution, see, you don't have a dual citizenship today. You have only, you represent yourself only as an Indian before the world and contest everything as an Indian. You don't have a dual citizenship today in the country. It's not encouraged under the constitution, it's not available also. Such a power, such a scheme is not available in the constitution. So in this setup, when time and again judgments on federal thought has said that we lean towards the center, including 9 judges. Now, for the first time in 2016, this lid of a presidential control stands removed in one of the critical areas, that is taxing power. So this is the starting point. You have now removed the lid of prior approval. Now it can travel to consideration, it can travel to assent, it can travel to consent, whatever area. It's a judgment of 9 judges, not like the Supreme Court judge in 2 or 9, it binds everybody. So this is the fear which is sought to be pitched through this judgment, is what we perceive, which we relentlessly argued before the court. You don't have to enter into this at all, because Part 13 is non-federal provisions. It conceives unitary thought, because Justice Kasi, the downfalls or the fears of the judgment are the following 3. Ultimately we'll bottle it down to 3. An American judge, Carsodo, who has seen a lot of federalism happening in USA, writes in one of his speeches very clearly, whether we sink or swim, let us do it together. It benefits the nation. Interestingly, 11 councils argued for the assessee, all the 11 relied on this passage. And it does not find a reference in the entire judgment, interestingly. So this is one aspect which we thought we have failed. 2, it's a golden moment in the history of Supreme Court to have unified India. It's a golden opportunity. You will never get this opportunity because Part 13 is very unique. And somehow we feel that golden opportunity has been missed. 3, the third concern all of us ventilated was neither Parliament nor Executive can decide these powers. Because Supreme Court has said, we will alone, courts alone have the competence to decide what is secularism and what is federalism. When it is so, when we can't define it through a legislation, democracy always swings on the moods at a particular prevailing moment. So the friction today is, you have a swinging democracy, the mood swings, oscillates like a pendulum, whereas Constitution has fixed notions. Constitution very clearly says, an interpretation of the Constitution has to be what as Constitution conceives, not as what each one of us conceive the Constitution to be. That has to be true only through an amendment. You cannot substitute an individual philosophy using Constitution as a platform and deliver a judgment. So, time and again, this basic principle of interpreting what we call it text and the context, that's exactly what the judgment also says. I'll just cite one example and wind up. In Mahabharata, the most misunderstood character is Karna. Because always Karna is cited and supported to say he is most unfortunate, he has been left out, he has been humiliated, he has been singled out. All this is being said. But if you read the whole epic, if those who believe in it, read the whole epic, the characterization or picturization of Karna is to convey the message. However noble you may be individually, if you align with the bad force, you will also sink. That's the message that epic tries to convey through that character. You remove that context, we can debate on Karna's loyalty or disloyalty till cows return. You put it in the context, you will understand the picturization very clear. So, federalism is a basic structure, contextually a basic thought. And I think this judgment has moved away from the center pitch and has marked or earmarked a new era of federalism, which we need to feel very apprehensive about. It's the perception we have. I thought I should throw it out to you for you to understand it in whatever way. In democracy, multiple views are possible, not only in courts, in outside courts also. I leave it there. It's a pleasure once again to be in our bar, and I'm thankful to the President, to the Secretary, and each one of you, and especially our Bishop Pitamaga at this stage. So fortunate that you are here to help us and hear me. Thank you so much. I take the blessings of each one of you. Thank you.